My brother looked me dead in the eye as he brought the heavy cast iron skillet down on my right hand. He didn't slip. He smiled. It sounded exactly like someone stepping on a thick, dry branch. I didn't even feel it at first. I just stood there in the kitchen, watching the back of my hand cave in against the cold granite countertop. My father didn't flinch. He looked at the blood beginning to pool on the stone, picked up his car keys, and let out a short, nervous laugh. "Nobody cares about your dream anyway," my father said, stepping over the shattered pieces of my morning coffee mug. My mother didn't even put down her cup. She took a slow sip of her dark roast and nodded. "You're just wasting everyone's time," she muttered, adjusting her silk robe. Before I could even pull my mangled hand away from the counter, the front doorbell rang, a sharp, piercing chime echoing through the foyer. It was the private town car sent by the Chicago Conservatory. They were here for the audition. My father sighed, looking at my hand like it was a spilled drink. "Look what you made him do," my father said. He pointed at my brother. "You know how stressed he gets before a showcase. Wrap that up, Olivia. Ryan, grab her sheet music. We're going to be late." The pain hit my forearm like a violent electric shock, but it was immediately replaced by absolute, freezing clarity. They tell you family is everything. They don't tell you that family is just a corporation where the golden child gets all the equity, and you carry all the liability. I don't know if you're watching this on your commute or sitting at home, but tell me below in the comments right now. What is the absolute most expensive thing a sibling has ever borrowed from you without asking? Because my brother stole a multi-million-dollar career, and my parents handed it to him. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. You only cry when you still have hope. I reached out with my left hand and pulled a white linen towel off the oven handle. I wrapped it tightly around my crushed fingers. I watched the bright red stain immediately bloom through the white fabric. I looked at Ryan. He was holding his leather folio. Inside that folio was my original, handwritten sheet music, the composition I had spent 4 years perfecting. He shifted his weight nervously, staring at the blood dripping onto the hardwood floor. "Are you going to the hospital?" Ryan asked. His voice was shaking. I looked him dead in the eyes and said one word: "Play." I didn't ask them for a ride. I walked out the back door and got into my 10-year-old Honda Civic. I drove myself to the emergency room with my left hand on the steering wheel, my right arm elevated against my chest to slow the bleeding. I didn't just drive to the ER to get a cast. I pulled into the hospital parking lot, turned off the engine, and picked up my phone. I dialed the non-emergency police line. I didn't file assault charges. Assault charges trigger immediate investigations. Investigations trigger lawyers. And lawyers delay auditions. I filed a formal, time-stamped incident report of accidental blunt force trauma, occurring at exactly 8:14 a.m. at my primary residence. I was legally sealing the timeline of the injury. I walked through the automatic sliding doors of the emergency room. It smelled like industrial bleach and stale coffee. The medical resident tried to discharge me with a simple splint and a prescription for painkillers. I refused the resident. I demanded the senior attending physician. I made him order a high-resolution, multi-angle MRI and requested his physical signature on the clinical notes. I needed court-admissible documentation proving the exact mechanism, angle, and severity of the blunt force trauma. Once the heavy white plaster cast was set, I ordered an Uber. I didn't go home. I walked into the Chicago Conservatory Auditorium exactly 2 hours later. The velvet doors were heavy. The room was completely silent except for the sound of a single piano. I walked straight down the center aisle. I sat in the absolute front row. I rested my white plaster cast on my lap, and I smiled. I sat in total silence and watched my brother perform my original composition. He didn't just play it. He played it perfectly. The judges stood up. A standing ovation for a stolen masterpiece. Ryan looked down from the stage, saw me sitting in the front row, and visibly swallowed hard. He thought I was smiling because I was in shock. He didn't realize I was smiling because I was watching him commit federal fraud on a commercial stage. If you've ever sacrificed your own comfort to fund the golden child of the family while they treated you like dirt, hit subscribe right now. You need to learn how to collect. I paid exactly $4,500 out of my own pocket for Ryan's Juilliard audition masterclasses 3 years prior. I worked remote night shifts transcribing corporate audio files just to fund his ego. While I was typing until my fingers cramped, Ryan was downtown, being fitted for custom 2000 performance tuxedos. He would come home and drink imported champagne with our parents in the living room. I had been relocated to the cramped, unheated attic for 4 entire years, just so Ryan could have the acoustically treated master bedroom. My parents owned a vintage Steinway grand piano. It sat in the center of the living room like a monument. I covered the $1,200 monthly maintenance and tuning fees out of my transcription paychecks. But I wasn't allowed to touch the ivory keys. Ryan needed the piano pristine for his practice sessions. I was forced to compose my music in the freezing attic on a cheap, weighted Yamaha keyboard with a sticky middle C key. I didn't care that I was writing my masterpiece on a piece of cheap plastic. The architecture of the music was mathematically perfect. The instrument didn't matter. Ryan knew it was perfect. That's why he started asking suspiciously technical questions about my chord progressions a month before the audition. He kept asking where I stored my raw sheet music. I didn't ignore it. Every time he asked, I fed his ego. I intentionally left decoy drafts scattered on the Steinway downstairs to keep him distracted. I let him steal the physical paper, because the real master manuscript stayed inside a locked, fireproof box under my attic bed, right next to a stamped, certified USPS mail receipt. He didn't know I had federally copyrighted the entire composition through a blind trust exactly 3 weeks before he picked up that skillet. Ryan won the full conservatory scholarship that afternoon. 2 weeks later, the offers rolled in. He signed a massive recording and national touring contract with a major classical label. It included a $150,000 cash advance. My parents were ecstatic. They proudly co-signed the legal agreement as his financial guarantors. They thought they were securing his future as a prodigy. They didn't read the standard indemnification clause on page 42. By co-signing, my father legally assumed total liability for any intellectual property fraud Ryan committed. His signature effectively put the deed to his house directly into my blind trust. Then, I disappeared. I packed 2 suitcases, left the attic, and moved into a cheap studio apartment on the south side of the city. For 8 months, I became a ghost. I didn't send a single text. I didn't make one phone call. I sat in my apartment and watched my brother perform my music on late-night television. I watched the glare of the studio lights hit his custom tuxedo. I watched my parents give glowing interviews to classical music magazines about the sacrifices of raising a genius. I tracked his digital footprint every single morning. I opened the Billboard classical charts over my black coffee. Number 10, number 6, number 2. Every time his album climbed a spot, my federal damages multiplier increased. Every radio play, every streaming royalty, every ticket sold for his national tour. I wasn't waiting. I was letting the interest compound. I let him spend every single cent of his massive cash advance. I let my parents take out a second mortgage to fund their travel to his international shows. Hit the like button right now if you agree that the absolute best part of watching a narcissist win is knowing you hold the detonator to their success. The 8-month mark finally hit. Ryan's stolen album reached number 1. The concrete was fully set. I picked up my phone and dialed my intellectual property attorney. Execute, I said. Before I show you the exact document that dismantled their entire bloodline. Make sure you hit subscribe. Because we don't just cut toxic family members off. We orchestrate their downfall. The meeting was held at the record label's corporate headquarters. A sterile, 42nd floor boardroom in downtown Chicago. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the gray skyline. The air conditioning hummed evenly from the ceiling vents. It was freezing. It completely isolated my family from the comfort of their domestic power. They couldn't hide behind their fireplace or their vintage Steinway here. Ryan and my parents arrived exactly 15 minutes late. A calculated power play. They were wearing matching designer clothes. Ryan's wrist flashed with a new platinum watch. They fully expected to sit down with the label executives and collect a massive royalty bonus check for hitting #1. They walked through the glass doors smiling. The smirk fell off Ryan's face the second he saw me. I was already seated at the far end of the massive mahogany table. My right hand was perfectly healed, resting completely flat against the polished wood. I was sipping sparkling water. I didn't speak. My attorney walked into the boardroom right behind them. He didn't offer a handshake. He didn't offer them coffee. He bypassed my family entirely and walked straight to the label's CEO at the head of the table. My lawyer slid a thick legal folder across the glass. A federal copyright injunction. He looked at the CEO and spoke with absolute, clinical detachment. You are commercially distributing stolen intellectual property, my attorney stated. He pulled out the time-stamped ER report of the blunt force trauma. He pulled out the certified USPS copyright registration dated 3 weeks prior to the attack. He laid them side by side on the table. The CEO's face went completely pale. He looked at the paperwork, then looked at Ryan with utter disgust. My attorney turned to my brother. Your $412,000 royalty account is officially frozen pending federal seizure, my lawyer said. Ryan physically slumped forward. His knees buckled. He reached out to steady himself, knocking over a glass of water. It spilled across the table, dripping onto his expensive Italian leather shoes. He didn't even try to wipe it up. He just stared at the federal injunction with wide, terrified eyes. My father stepped forward. His face flushed red with anger. You can't do this. We are his guarantors. We have a contract. My father yelled. My attorney slowly turned his head. I know, he replied. He slid the second document across the table. The clawback lawsuit. My father reached for it. His eyes scanned the highlighted indemnification clause he had signed 8 months ago. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He realized the trap. He realized that by co-signing the cash advance, he had legally assumed total financial liability for his son's fraud. He realized that his signature effectively put the deed to his house directly into my blind trust to cover the $412,000 in damages. His chest heaved. He couldn't catch his breath. The CEO of the record label stood up. He didn't yell. He simply looked at Ryan. You're dropped from this label. As of this exact second. You will never play in a commercial symphony again, the CEO stated. The label's senior counsel picked up Ryan's original performance contract. He gripped the heavy cardstock with both hands. The crisp, sharp sound of the paper tearing in half echoed in the dead silent room. That was the sound of absolute finality. I stood up. I didn't gloat. I didn't demand an apology. I just picked up my coat, walked past my hyperventilating father and my paralyzed brother, and stepped into the elevator. Today, I am sitting alone in my family's old living room. I am playing my composition flawlessly on the vintage Steinway. I own the house now. I seized it in the bankruptcy settlement when my parents couldn't cover the federal damages. I finished the final chord perfectly. The acoustics in the room are magnificent. As I lifted my hands from the ivory keys, my right metacarpal ached faintly.
À permanent.
Physical ghost of the betrayal. But it doesn't bother me anymore. Tell me in the comments, if your family mutilated you to steal your life's work, would you have warned the record label immediately? Or would you have let them spend the money first? Subscribe to this channel if you are done playing the casualty. We only engineer architects here. They thought breaking my hand meant I couldn't play. They forgot you don't need a right hand to sign a lawsuit.